What is going on, guys? Jim from Import Image Racing, and welcome back to the channel. Today is a super exciting day for me. As you've seen in our last episode, we put our brand new Cosmis XT005Rs onto the car, and I love this look. But as you probably know, it is missing something. I mean, although I think the car looks fantastic the way it is sitting on the stock ride height, it's just something about those kinds of looks that I'm just not super happy with. So ever since I did put the wheels on, I have been dying to complete this look by trying to bring this vehicle a little bit closer to the earth. And today we are going to be doing that with Silver's NEOMAX coilovers. Check it out. That's right, guys and girls, we have Silver's NEOMAX coilovers going on the VA chassis WRX. This is a fantastic choice, I believe, for these particular vehicles, and I could not wait to get my hands on some of these so that we can bring this thing closer to the ground. In this video, I'm going to be unboxing, installing, and kind of setting up these coilovers to give you a better idea of what you're in for when you buy a set of coilovers. So although I am installing NEOMAX coilovers on the car today, this installation video plus kind of like a review and setup is going to help you guys no matter which brand you choose, whether it's BC Racing, whether it's Fortune Auto, whatever it is you want. Now, I chose the Silver's and NEOMAX coilovers for a handful of reasons. Number one, I love what you get for the cost. On top of that, I love the digressive piston design that comes along with these style coilovers. I think they ride fantastic. I think they're easy to maintain. There's just so many good reasons. So once again, I'm going to get to unboxing these things, getting this car onto the jack stands, and kind of showing you what's inside, what to expect, and how we're going to set these things up for a great everyday driving car. Got both of our front wheels off. That's pretty self-explanatory. We jacked the car up, secured it on some jack stands, removed those front wheels. Did that with the help of this Cosmis wheel lock tool that was provided with our wheel installation kit. But as far as the suspension goes, it's pretty exposed at the moment. The next few steps we're gonna have are to remove this 12mm bolt here to get our brake line off. With a pair of pliers, we're gonna remove this wheel speed sensor harness here. We have two 19mm bolt and nuts that hold the strut to the knuckle. The top bolt itself is the eccentric, and when you turn this, it kind of, moves everything in and out. We'll set that on the way out, but remember that when you go to reinstall this with our new suspension, the eccentric bolt goes on top, and both of the bolts face forward. So your threaded section here is going to face the front end of the car. And then once we get all that stuff loose and out, we're going to head on up to the top, and then we just have three 12mm nuts to remove onto the top strut hat here, and this whole assembly will just kind of fall into our hands. And we'll do both of the fronts, and then we'll kind of unbox the Silver suspension and show you what we're looking at. Both front struts are out. We are looking pretty good there, but I did just want to give you guys who are thinking of attempting this kind of stuff yourself a little bit of a pro tip. Obviously the strut is missing. It's already been pulled from the vehicle. But for you guys who aren't doing this all the time or not, seasoned mechanics, I will tell you, you're going to want to support this hub. This whole hub assembly here is very, very heavy. So when you knock that last bolt out of here, one on each side, this hub is going to fall. And because of the weight of it, it can start kind of pulling on some of these cables or even kind of manipulating our axle or the bearing cage that's in our CV joint. Sometimes even pulling those CV bearings out. And that can cause all kinds of problems when we go to put it back together, or even if it does go back together because the bearing cage is compromised, now you can kind of get some rolling noises or some other kind of highway noises once this thing kind of gets to rolling and spinning. So when you take that last bolt out, just make sure you got a hand on it and then just kind of gently set this whole hub and knuckle assembly down to where, you know, the sway bar is still connected, the control arm is still connected, so this thing's gonna stay there. But well, like I said, you just don't want a lot of pressure, you know, just yanking on all these cables and lines and the axle. Let's take a look at the suspension we have. Here it is, bada bing. This is the Silver's NEOMAX coilover kit. It's not the ultra low, it's like the standard low kit. This car, although rides pretty high, I'm not really interested in slamming this thing all the way to the ground for lots of reasons. It is my daily driver, not to mention, you know, I've got this big old lip here, and I don't want this thing just blasting off and me having to replace it like, you know, every couple of days because I hit something. So I'm going to be taking this thing pretty low, but not like ultra low. So I'm still probably going to have about a finger gap in the front, and I think that that's going to be exactly where I want the car to be. But once you actually open the box, we're going to get all four of our struts here, all of our coilovers. You'll also get a Silver's owner's manual and service manual in here. You get your spanner wrenches for adjusting it. You also can see they have this Allen wrench here that they provide for you so that you can adjust your camber plates up top. I also opted for the remote adjusters for the rear, because once we start kind of cranking on this thing, this is what's going to allow me to change my compression and rebound and all that. Once it's in the car, it's going to be very difficult for me to reach from the back. So these kind of go on top here, and then this goes into the trunk area and allows me to spin it from the top. Much easier than having to pull all of the stuff out of the trunk to do that. Before I go slamming these brand new coilovers in here, I'm going to show you how we're going to set up the preload on these coilovers. Because I opted for the factory spring setup, they kind of just come pre-assembled in the box, and there's no factory preload set on these. It looks like, you know, this one's tight, but I know one or two of these is kind of loose. So we're going to set the preload on that. I have a caliper that's going to help me along with this, but I'm going to show you a trick using your factory spanner wrench that they provide that's going to help you set up your suspension for success. So let's talk about preload. Right off the bat, we're going to be starting with our driver front coil just because, hey, it's easy, it's right here. But the same procedure that we're going to be performing on this coil, we're going to perform on the rest of the three corners. But hey, you got to start somewhere. So we are going to be setting the preload on this coilover. And what that means is we're going to be setting the compression of this spring with no other forces applied to this strut. So basically, we don't have the weight of the car on it. It's just the length of the assembly, basically from our shock bottom or our spring bottom to our shock top. So there's no additional forces on either way here. So what we're going to do first is we are going to be breaking loose our locking collar, and we're going to spin this whole spring assembly down until it's basically loose. It's not loose like, you know, up and down, but I mean, I can spin this spring in here pretty easily without spinning my adjustment collar here. So the first thing we're going to do is spin this adjusting collar up until we have pretty much a zero pressure on the spring. So once again, there's no up and down movement. I've just started to kind of compress the spring ever so slightly, so I'm getting a little bit of resistance when I go to kind of like spin this spring around our shock body. At that point in time, we're going to bring our locking collar up till it meets the bottom of our adjustment. Then we're going to take a paint marker, a Sharpie, anything like that, and we're going to go ahead and mark that collar right on the bottom. So right there we have a little paint drip, so we know where our zero compression mark is right there. So how do we measure preload? So what Silver's is going to tell you is they're going to want to see between 3mm and 5 and 6mm of preload. With my years of experience, I like a little bit more of a stiffer ride. So I'm going to be going a little bit more on the north side of that. So I'm going to be setting this thing between 5 and 6mm of preload. So how we do that is now we have our zero preload, and then we are going to be spinning our collar, our adjustment collar, up. Now every turn that I make on here is getting this spring a little bit more compressed than it was previous. So now we have a really good amount of compression or preload on this spring, and it's going to get kind of difficult as I start to go up. Now for me, I have my dial caliper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this bad boy on here, and then I can measure how much distance I have to get to my 6 millimeters of preload. So let's get it right at 6. We will lock it down right there. 599, 6. And then I can kind of tell with our gap here when I hit my 6 millimeter mark. I still have a little bit to go. So there we have it. We actually have 6 millimeters of preload, which is this gap that's in between our locking collar and our adjustment collar. Now I can go ahead and spin this up, lock it down with my spanner wrench, and I know that this particular strut is preloaded with 6 millimeters of preload. But let's say you don't have this bad boy right here. What else can you do to kind of preload these on the car, you know, without any real hassle? Well, I will show you a cool little trick. So once our dial caliper is set to 0 across the board, that's where our spanner wrench kind of comes in. This spanner wrench has a thickness. Now I can show you that the thickness of this spanner wrench is almost dead on to 5 millimeters. So what that means is the thickness of our spanner wrench is about the distance we're going to want in between our locking collar and our adjustment collar. So if you don't have an indicator, you can go a little bit north of your 5 millimeters of preload, put this right on our locking collar, and then spin your adjustment collar down until you've touched both sides of our spanner wrench, and then that shows you that we have 5 millimeters of preload on all 4 of our struts. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and lock this collar down, and we are going to get to setting the preload on all 3 of the rest of them, and then we will throw our front coilovers back into the car. We've got our preload set, and we've got our coilovers ready to install in the front, so let's get these bad boys in the car. Here's something to go over for you guys who, don't do this every single day. So like I had mentioned before when we disassembled, our top bolt here is an eccentric bolt, which means it kind of has like some differences in thickness. And as you rotate that bolt, your camber can go in and out. So I will show you that bolt here. As you can see, it has a thinner side and it has a thicker side. Now on the head of this bolt, you'll see kind of some dashes on there that are kind of indicators on if you have more or less camber. So now because we have our top hats, our adjustable top hats on the coilover, not that this isn't needed, because we can still use this to dial in our alignment and or our fitment depending on what kind of wheel and tire choice we have. But because mine is a relatively tame fitment, I'm just going to install this bolt with the middle dash facing dead vertical. Then once it's vertical, I will actually push the top of the knuckle in as I tighten it to give it the most amount of camber possible with this bolt being vertical. So if we do need to get a little bit more out of it when we do our alignment, we can, and we can get a whole lot less if we decide to turn it the other way. One other thing while we're here, both of the rear coilovers are practically the same coilover. Our front coilovers are sided, so they are in particular to the side of the car that we're installing. One of the ways to notice that, and one of the big ways to notice that, is which way our speed sensor clip and our brake line clip here, which way they are oriented on the coilover. So we will have our brake line in the rear, and we will have our speed sensor in the front. Also, when we go to install it, we now have to worry about which way our top hat is actually facing. We're going to want to make sure that our top hat with our in and out adjustments is facing the outer edge of the vehicle and pretty much the back line of the intercooler. Depending on which way you orient this in here, we could get a lot more caster, or basically where it would jolt towards the absolute center of the vehicle instead of like the center line, the imaginary line that goes down the entire center of the car. So you're going to want that top hat to sit just like that. Both of our rear wheels are off. We can take a look inside the well here. There's our factory shock and strut. We're going to be removing those to replace them with the 2 rear coilovers. The other thing is I'm getting pretty close to the back door here, so I might be forced to open this door and let you know, the devil's anus in. And you know, it's not terribly hot in here. You know, with the fan going, it's definitely cooled down to probably a brisk 95. So, you know, once I open this door, we're definitely 100 plus. Let's see what happens here. It might even be raining. It was raining a little while ago. Don't be raining. Okay, looks a little crummy out, a little musty out, but let's try to get this rear out so I don't have to get stuck in this. Let's go. Both of the rear struts are out. That took, I mean, almost no time. The rear here is pretty easy. Once you take your trunk liner out, you can pull up these little tabs here, and there's two 14 millimeter nuts, one there per side. You can do that for the top. And then once we're on the bottom here, we have another 14 millimeter bolt and nut for our sway bar end link. And then we have our two 17 millimeter bolts for the bottom of our strut, and then one of the 17 millimeter bolts for the knuckle over there. I leave this bolt completely tight. I don't even touch it. It already has the compression on it from the strut on there, so I definitely don't want to loosen that up because I don't want to have to preload that bushing again once I put everything on. That's a pretty easy, you know, disassembly process there. Like I said, we got both of them out. We have our coilovers on the bench. They're pre-loaded, so they should be ready to go in. Oh yeah, the one other thing that I have here is for my adjustable tops here. So I will be, let's see, this particular one here, have a little Allen wrench. We'll loosen that up. We'll pull this knob off. We'll make our incision in the trunk, which I will show you when we go back there. Then we will slide this back on, and then with that Allen on there, we will kind of put this whole thing together so that we can access this through our trunk. And then, you know, make a small hole so that this piece can come through, and then we don't have a bunch of just, you know, open space back here. It'll look relatively factory, and I'll show you some tricks that I have to kind of put it out of the way and not have it dangling all around, but I think you're going to like what you see here. To show you what I did, I just made two small incisions. There is a drill hole, as you can see, right here, and then there's also a drill hole right here. I made those holes with a 9/32 drill bit, and they are basically right above the opening for the strut. As we install our strut up into the wheel well, there, we're going to attach our adjuster screw, and then it is going to come up through this hole once I take the top of the adjuster screw off, and then we'll reattach that adjuster screw up here. I'll kind of give you an idea of what I'm looking at and how clean that looks once we install the top of the struts. Take a look at that. Looking pretty fresh. coming right through the floorboard there. So now, you know, with everything in the trunk here, I can just kind of come back, and if I feel like I need to loosen it up or tighten for the adjustment, it's right there. Another thing that you can do, which I'm not going to because I usually don't have a lot of stuff in the trunk here, so it doesn't really bother me, but if you're looking to get like super tight into this, you can put a couple of pinholes, like small holes, into the side here, 2 of them to be exact, and then you can run a zip tie, a very small zip tie, through those holes, and then you can zip tie this particular piece very, very close to the edge here so that it doesn't kind of like poke out into our storage space and just kind of keep them upright. Now, me personally, I prefer to not just make a whole bunch of holes in my interior, so I think 1 hole per side is enough as is. So we have both of the tops locked down. Sorry, I still have some tools in here. I'll lock everything down. Have them done up here. We'll throw the trunk liner back in, and then we'll get to actually securing the bottom portion of the coilovers. Once they're in, you'll probably notice the car's not that low yet. A lot of times I will like to install them at a decent ride height, and then I'll take it for a physical drive, kind of make sure that I don't get any kind of pops and bangs, and make sure everything's looking pretty good, sounding pretty good. And then once I'm pretty confident with the install, we're going to go ahead and kind of revisit the ride height. Not to mention, at that point in time, I can get a really good measurement of where the car is, and then I can do, you know, simple math and kind of bring down my wheel gap to where I think I'm gonna want it for the street. There you have it. The rear end is officially back together. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. I mean, since everything was kind of preloaded and ready to go and ready to install, you know, once I made the incision up top, everything slid right in. Let's see, I mean, all of our 3 pieces of hardware, you just reinstall them in the same orientation in which you took them out. So all of our threads are facing the rear of the car in the back. Once again, our preload is all set and ready to go. The only thing I really have to deal with now is ride height. So we're gonna put our wheels back onto the car. Oh yeah, and then I'll have to set my dampening as well before we go out onto our maiden voyage. So we'll put it down, put the wheels back on, set the dampening, and then once I'm pretty happy with the way the car rides as far as feel, we'll reset the ride height to something a little bit more my taste, which is going to be, you know, considerably lower than that, because that's what we're here to do. She is down on the ground. Take a look at this. Well, I can already kind of tell you, that's a little bit more like what I'm going for. Not that. But I will tell you, it's probably, I don't know, that might be just a little bit lower than I'm interested in the rear, especially once this kind of settles. Because I would imagine once I get this car out on the road a couple of 100 miles, within the next week or so, this is going to settle about a 1/4 inch in my experience here, which actually might kind of put me a little bit over the edge for what I want to do for a ride fitment and height. So I'm going to go ahead and torque the wheels. Oh yeah, before we do that, we'll do our compression setting, and I'll show you a little trick with there so you don't have to count like 45 clicks to the left or 70 clicks to the right. Hey, why don't we just do it right here? So right at the top of this bad boy, you'll see it says hard one way and soft the other way. So they're very small increments. For example, that's a click. So instead of having to count countless rotations, or I'm sorry, countless clicks, we're just going to rotate it. So we're going to rotate it all the way hard. Then what we're going to do is kind of see the orientation in which the top of this is. So we know it's upside down. So let's square up with that. So hard is completely upside down. So now we'll do it in full rotations. 1 rotation, 2, 3, 4, almost 4 rotations plus 1 additional click. So now we know to get to the middle, instead of counting, 25 clicks, we'll just take it all the way to where we're 1 click off of complete hard, and then 2 full rotations. Now right there should be right in the middle for compression there. So we're going to set that for all 4 of our corners. And then like the ride height, I'm going to drive around with this vehicle, and once it breaks in, I'm going to kind of figure out where I want my compression to be. Do I want it a little harder? Do I want it a little softer? All depends on my road conditions. Once again, I've done this probably 2,000 times. So at this point in time, I have an idea that I'm going to go a little bit harder than the average person, just because I set the car up for spirited driving, and I really like the fact that the car handles good. That's why I do a little bit more preload, or I should say like on the top end of the preload. I'm also the kind of guy who loves to just put in like solid engine mounts on an almost otherwise stock car. I just like that race car feel. Most of the race cars I've owned in my time don't have power steering or air conditioning. Luckily, this car does, so it gives me that race car feel, but also I don't completely die and or sweat to death. So I'm ready to get this thing out of the garage. We're going to go take it for a spin. Yeah, okay, so that's a bit ridiculous. The rear is definitely too low. We've probably already kind of settled at least 1/8 of an inch in the rear, and I'm just, thinking I'm going to have to bring that up. The front has stayed, pretty similar up here, maybe a little bit lower, but I think what I'm going to end up doing is probably bringing the rear up about a half, I don't know, maybe 3/8 or something like that, and then probably the front down about a half or so, because I do like a little bit of rake. I'm kind of into that drag look. I mean, for the most part, I want it to be even, but if it's a little, like an 1/8 inch higher in the rear than it is in the front, I think I can get away with that and be really happy with the look. So let's go ahead and get to the final ride height adjustment. Then we can unveil this thing and see what it looks like with our coils and Cosmis XT005Rs on it. I am super, super psyched. Dang, boys, I just can't beat this rain. Bummer. The things I gotta go through to give you a proper reveal of this car. Man, who said YouTube was easy? Dang, they lying, ain't they? It's crazy, but I do have all my car wash stuff out, so it looks like the rain just passed. I got one final adjustment I want to do, because I am like super particular on this car. As far as the actual ride heights, man, I get down to like well under 1/8 of an inch to make sure that it's exactly the way I want it. Luckily, I get the time and effort to do these kinds of things to kind of give you what I would think is the best look for me for this vehicle. So, looks like the rain stopped, drying out maybe a little bit. Let's get this side adjusted. We're going to wash it up real quick, and then we're going to do the big reveal. Who's ready to see this thing? Wow. Here it is. We have this thing all dialed in. It's clean. It's ready for you guys to see it. I mean, nothing ever comes easy. We've been battling the weather here pretty much all day. Luckily, as you can tell, the storms and the rain have broke. Now, I get to give to you the big reveal of our Silvers NEOMAX coilovers with our Cosmis XT005Rs. Are you guys ready? Here it is. Check it out. Wow, this thing is sitting fresh. I absolutely love it. Let's take a walk around, take a look at some wheel gap here. Got in the rear, man, just about to clear that tire. Same thing on the front. I mean, just driving it around, nothing rubs. We've got it pretty good, pretty dialed in. That did take me a little bit of time. I'll tell you a little bit more about that once we get all the way around the car and take a look. Sitting pretty good, absolutely love it. I mean, look at that fitment in there. That is awesome. Now, that is no further adjustments in the rear. That's just kind of putting the suspension on and dialing in our ride height. And I mean, that thing is sitting pretty flush, looking good. Now, as far as the front goes, when we lowered the front down, it dove the camber in quite a bit. So we had a lot of inward motion on our top tire here. So there was a lot of gap between our tire and our fender. So I'll kind of show you what I did. The car still needs an alignment, but I've been doing this a long time, so I was able to do some visual adjustments on this thing. So it drives nice and straight, the steering wheel's straight, but I'll definitely throw it on the rack and kind of dial those numbers in. But from the factory, Our camber plate up here is pretty much dead in the center, and there's actually a small circle on our center adjustment. You can see these hashes here, and there'll be a small circle to kind of notate the center. And then there's a small dash on the top of our strut assembly to kind of show you that everything's lined up. So what I was doing, after I set the ride height and noticed that the top was kind of caved in a little bit more than I like, I went ahead and jacked the car back up, loosened all 4 of our Allens here, and kind of with a microfiber cloth and a pry bar, pried this up positive about 2 of the dashes. And what that did is kind of brought the wheel a lot more vertical. It still has some negative camber, as you can probably tell from this angle, but I really wanted to match the fender gap from the front and the rear. So I was able to do that, and you know, like I said, I get pretty meticulous, so I had a tape measure here that I was poking in to see how much distance from the tire to the fender, so I actually matched that all the way around. Same thing with the ride height. I have 25 inches from the ground to the actual touch of the arch on the front, and then we're 25 1/8 from the ground to the top of the arch in the rear. If you match them to be 25 or 26 or whatever you're looking for all the way around, although it's matching on the actual tape measure, it kind of looks like it tucks a little bit in the rear over the front. So, you know, you kind of get this weird, almost like Carolina squat look to the rear of the vehicle. So I brought the rear up about 1/8 more, and that really kind of, from a visual aspect, really leveled the car out. But I'll tell you what, I mean, this thing just looks fantastic. This is exactly, I mean, literally exactly what I was going for. I love the 5-spoke wheel. I love the machine lip. I think that just works so good with this paint combination. And then when it sits right, I mean, good grief. This car just looks fantastic. Man, it looks good. I have this car dialed in just the way I want it, which is a little bit on the stiffer side. It really does kind of feel more like a go-kart, but I like that for several different reasons. Like I said, I'm kind of a race car guy. I do a lot of race car stuff, you know, so of course I want my daily driver to, you know, drive like a race car. I do some pretty high speed cornering, and I really just like the way the car is set up. It is just what, from my personal point of view, that's what I'm looking for in a car. Now, like I said, I have the dampening and everything on this dialed up pretty good at this point, so it is a little bit stiffer than I would say most people probably want it. You know, like I said, I also did a little bit more preload than I would say the average person would do, but that is really kind of contouring to things that I want. I will tell you, you can dial the rebound and all that stuff down in these coilovers, and it feels a lot more like a normal running and driving car, and it can do all of these things. My favorite part about these coilovers, the fact is, depending on what you want, it can do it. You want a soft ride? No problem. You want a stiffer ride? You want race car stuff like I do? Does it? No problem. No questions asked. And I'll tell you what, it just looks fantastic. I cannot get over how much I love just the stance of this car. And when I get behind the wheel, I am so satisfied with the way it drives that, I mean, this is the absolute perfect combination. Make sure to drop all of the links to my setup in the description below when it comes to the wheels, my tire setup, and especially my coilover setup. I mean, this thing, I could not ask for more. I am super psyched. But for thousands of parts just like this, and tons more, man, you guys already know. Hit up importimageracing.com for all of the best deals on the web and in the world, and we'll catch you on the next one.